Okay, so hi everyone. Um, Yesterday I posted something on Facebook that said, I'm a writer, ask me questions. And I don't know why I didn't think anybody would actually ask questions because I don't know why. But quite a few people actually posted and asked me questions. So instead of answering them individually, I'm going to do it this way. And I'm going to respond to all of your questions that I have on here. And I'm going to post it on here. So here's the question. I don't know if you can see it. Probably not. It just says I'm a writer, ask me questions. So the first one was from my friend Tamara. I know I answered her question, but she asked me, what's your favorite subject to write about? And she put in parentheses K-pop. And I said, and she asked, what are you working on now? So I like to write fantasy, dark fantasy. It doesn't matter as long as it's in that realm. Yes, K-pop does help. And for the longest time, I tried to avoid writing fan fiction. Now, back, in the early 2000s and the late 90s, I did write fan fiction. And it got to be a little more difficult. And I don't really know why, but I felt like I was losing my characters and my quote unquote world that I write my stories in, where my characters are based. So then I stopped writing fan fiction, sorry, for quite a while, and right around 2000s, 2017, like right around August, I think, I started writing fan fiction again, and it blew up quite literally. You can ask my friend Sam. She reads every single one of my stories before I do anything with them. She helps me if I have to add anything to them, or she gives me her feedback. Like, I love her so much. But what I'm currently working on is a psychic story. Now, this is my first time dealing with psychics. I've never dealt with characters that are psychics ever. So this is my first one, and this story, I like to create stories and create characters with my friends sometimes, with kind of basing it off of them. So I figured, why not ask my friends to kind of create their own profiles? And that's what I did, and I got quite a few characters. So all those characters that my friends contributed into um, making will be in this story. Now I always tweak all my characters and I change things up just to kind of make them a little more original, how I think they should kind of flow along with the story. But for the most part, that's what I'm doing right now. So I hope that answers your question. Um, Another one of my friends asked what the title of the story that I had everyone give me characters for. I don't think of titles before the story's done. I write the story out and then I give the title. So, title's usually the last thing, and for some reason, that seems to be the one that's the hardest for me to do. All right, so moving right along, another one of my friends, Kiana, she asks, how did you get into writing? And I've been writing for a very long time, almost 30 years. I think I was like 5, maybe 6 when I started writing. I don't honestly remember. I just knew I always was writing. And it first started out with poetry. And it was just, simple stuff. And then as I got older, I kept writing poetry and I kept writing stories. So then I kind of gradually developed my world where my characters and all my stories are based on. And I've just been doing it ever since. And, I've always had people ask me, how do I create my characters? How do I establish my stories? And I never really thought about it. I never really thought about any of how I do anything. I just did it. It was there, it happened. And, recently, my friend Sam, she's been asking me the same questions. And for the longest time, I didn't know what to say either. I just kind of if it pops into my head and it doesn't leave me alone, then I got to write it out. And for the most part, that's what I do. I've always had a journal and pen or paper pencil, mostly pencils. I like my little mechanical pencils. See? Mechanical pencils. I hate sharpening my pencils because I write so fast and write so much. I was like, I'm not dealing with having to sharpen my pencils constantly. So there, mechanical pencil. It can't be any kind of mechanical pencil. It can't be the clickers. I don't like the clickers because they have the little erasers that pop out easy. So just these ones. These ones here. I love these ones. These will be the only ones I ever get. And they're hard as hell to find. And when I do find them, they're expensive. So usually I go to an office supply store and buy like 1 or 2, 3 boxes, depending on how much money I have. So that's what I do. I still write with notebooks and paper and pencil, but I'm so glad that I have a phone. Yay! Where I can write and I don't have to always carry a large bag, because I'll be honest with you, I've carried around my stories all my life and they get heavy. When I was in school back in 2006, well, I'll just give you a little area. 2006 to 2009, I was going to school, and I always had like 2 binders, and everybody always wondered, is that schoolwork? No, it's my stories, So when I got my first laptop, everything went right on it. I scanned all my stories; they're all on my laptop, and I've been slowly retyping them and editing them as I need to. But yeah, that how I got into writing should be the easiest question to answer, but in my mind it wasn't, because it's been so long, almost 30 years of writing, and I think it was kind of my way of, because I'm an only child, I write down what I played when I was younger, so I don't know. Let's just say it was born into me. There we go. It was born into me. So the next friend that commented, he asked quite a few questions. It's Robin, and he asked, "Do you have a process? Are you a plotter or a pantser? How many drafts do you go through on average before you declare a novel story finished? Does your process change from story to story? And do you have a particular editing process?" Now, when I first read this, I was half asleep, and when I saw plotter or pantser, I was like, I don't pants anyone. Sorry. I do have a process, and I'll get to that in a second. I don't really plot out my stories. They just kind of, I write them and they happen as they go. Sometimes I do try and plot them out. I at least make like a basic, like bam, 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 bam type of plot, but it doesn't always go that way. And sometimes all of a sudden my story's like, nope, I don't want to go this way. And I'll be like 10, 15 pages into it. And it's like, no, you're not going this way. You're gonna go a different way. So then I have to stop the entire story, and sometimes I have to take a step back from it, leave it alone for a couple days, and then go back into reading it and see if it re-triggers the story that it was supposed to be, the way it was supposed to be. Um, That happens doesn't happen quite a bit, but it has happened recently in a couple of my stories. One is I just give a basic title for my story so I know what they are when I'm opening them. And one of them is called Fashion X, and it's a Monster X fan fiction. And it's supposed to be a model story, and it centers around Hongwan of Monster X. Well, I get about, I want to say like 10, 15 pages into it, and all of a sudden, like, nope, you're not going that way. So, that was almost a month ago that I stopped. So, yeah, that story is not ready to be written at the moment. So, to that, I'm not really a plotter. It just kind of happens as it goes. I do make a basic plot line, and I kind of know my characters, who's gonna be in it, and where it's going to go. Sometimes I don't know how the story's gonna begin. I know how it's gonna end. I just don't know how to get there. So then I don't like writing out my ending because that'll dictate how the beginning of the story goes. So then I have to think about it for a while, kind of mull it over, and then I start writing it. And sometimes it goes by really fast. And I'm like, wow, 30 pages done in 2 days. Hooray. Other times I'm struggling with a 10-page story that takes me a week. So, so with the question, how many drafts do I go through on average before I declare it done? Back when I was still handwriting my stories, I went through 5, 6 drafts. And I didn't rewrite it. I used colored pens. Like my first draft was a red pen. My second draft was usually a blue pen. My third draft, no, I take that back. My first draft would be a pencil. My second draft would actually be a pencil, because it's just like crossing out or erasing certain words. And then when I get into the red pen, and that's my third draft, that's when I'm like, what the hell was I thinking here? No, we're going to change that. And then when I get to the blue pen, that's when I'm adding details. By the time I get to a black pen, I'm finishing certain things that I didn't quite add into the story. Like I started writing it and I was like, okay, I know there's going to be more here. I just want to keep going. So that's how I do it. So I usually have 5 or 6 drafts that I go through. Um, I have a kitty that's scratching up on me. I do have a particular editing process. You just kind of heard it. That's when I was handwriting my stuff. Now that I type most of my stories, um, my editing process is kind of all over the place. Sometimes I'm editing as I'm writing the damn story. Other times I finish it and I leave it alone for 3 or 4 days and I go back through it. Most of the time, I will edit my story 4 or 5 times still, um, before I feel comfortable with it being done. And even after I send it to my friend Sam, I still edit it a couple times. And usually I wait until after I talk to her and get out some of my ideas that were kind of like stuck in my head. Um, that's when I do that. And I do one more final edit. Um, Does my process change from story to story? Yes. Yes, it does. Depending on what the idea is in my head that I'm kind of batting back and forth with, I'll answer the do I have a process? Yes. Most writers do actually have a process. I know Robin knows that, and most writers do know that. My process usually begins with my character. Is it a central character? Is it a group of central characters? Um, I'll use one of my fanfics as a good example of my process. So When I was writing, what was it? Pagoda House Diaries. Now, I will eventually post this on my AO3, but as of right now, I don't have it up. It takes me a long time to post my stuff on AO3. But Pagoda House Diaries, I knew for sure I wanted it to be a mafia story. I didn't know how. I just wanted it to be a mafia story, and I wanted it to involve BTS because when they were here for AMAs, they did their photo shoot with Dispatch and Neighbor. And one picture inspired me completely, and of course it was the golden maknae, golden youngest, that's what it means in Korean, Jungkook. And it inspired me to want to write a mafia story because he looked like a mafia boss's son. Unfortunately, that was the original idea, and unfortunately it didn't go that way. And I had wanted to write a Jin mafia story. Didn't happen either. Pagoda House Diaries is what happened with that mafia idea. So I made sure that I know my central characters for sure. And if the story is going to require a very detailed plot or a detailed what am I trying to say? A detailed like bad guy where it's gonna have a lot of webs going and where I gotta really think about this and I'm going back and forth and back and forth as I'm writing the story. So it just really depends. I have to know my characters. I have to know a quote unquote theme. Like with the mafia story. Um I did I did have to kind of stay in that mentality um to make sure that it didn't go too far off. It was a very interesting story. Sam liked it. We still talk about it. um, but yeah, I gotta make sure that there is I know I keep repeating myself because I just want to make sure that I kind of tell you my whole process. Sometimes my process involves a lot of research because I do make sure that even though what I write is fantasy, I make sure that my stories do contain reality. Like one of my little short stories is called Fancy Pants and the Sakatini. Sakatini is a real drink. It is a martini made with sake. It's a real drink. It looks really good. I'm not a drinker, but if ever I did want to try a drink, that would be the one I would try, or sake. Wouldn't go anywhere near soju. Soju, sorry, soju, not suju. But yeah, I make sure that I do a lot of research. I have a lot of mythology involved in my stories: Greek, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, um, Middle Eastern, Irish, Japanese, Korean. I even have some Thai influences, definitely some Chinese influences. I have a couple of Russian. It varies. So there's quite a few things that I always have to establish. One is my characters, who it's centralizing around. If there's going to be pairings, um, like male to female. Um, it seems like when I'm writing a lot of my fan fiction, I make sure there's some kind of pairing that kind of matches the male, so and that's a very lengthy process for me as well, because sometimes the female character in one story doesn't kind of go through into the next story. I always, when it comes to the fan fiction, I always use just one the female character once, and I never use her again. And I'm trying to avoid it where I use her name as well. Sometimes it doesn't work out because I really, really like that name, so I end up using another one, using it again in another story. So let's see. Character who is centralizing around if there's a pairing, basic details of my plot line, what the end game is. Let's see. End game. Who the bad guy is, what they're wanting. I try and make my bad guy characters be a little bit more than just the basic, get the girl or damsel in distress. I don't really write a lot of damsel in distress stories. I make sure that my bad guys have a little bit more depth to them. And that's kind of what I do. Even when I'm editing, I still edit my bad guy characters as well. And sometimes I keep them in mind if I didn't kill them off in the story to carry it over again. I'm going back into my one blog where I'm talking about my characters. But for me, that's a large process. For me, that's how I like. I like making sure my characters are very well developed. They're not just like all of a sudden put right into the story. But yeah, that is. I have a very lengthy process that can take days sometimes. And it's, I don't want to say it's fun, but for me, it's just who I am because I want to make sure my story is perfect and then it makes sense. But I'm never sure if I put enough explanation in it for somebody who doesn't really know my writing, if I put enough in there, or if I put too much. So I'm always in that delicate balance where it's like, did I put too much? Am I rambling? Is that not enough? So that's why, again, I'm very grateful to Sam. She really helps. I value her opinion so very much because when she asks me questions, it's not just, oh, she just doesn't want to ask because she feels like I want her to ask. She's genuinely curious. And sometimes me and her get so in depth with my characters that we completely forget what we're talking about. So, yeah, that's my main thing. That's my whole process. Um, I can elaborate more on it, but I don't really want to because I don't really know it. I usually don't notice my process until I'm in the middle of it. But my last one is from my friend Trevlin. Hope I pronounced your name right. She asked, "How do you fight writer's block?" Whew, okay, this writer's block. I hate writer's block. How I usually fight writer's block is I force myself to write something, anything, a thought, and I keep doing it, and I kind of every little thought that I have that could lead to a story, I just write it. Sometimes writer's block, every writer is different, so it really depends on what kind of writer you are. Some writers, they need to just completely step away from it and kind of like push it aside. I don't want to say forget that they write, but I don't want to say that um, I don't want to say that what am I trying to say? I don't remember. Sorry. Kind of did this last minute because I remembered I asked this question the other day. But I I've forced myself to write something. And usually I'm just working on my characters. And if as I'm writing and working on my characters, if all of a sudden they're like, it inspires me to kind of, I always call them character development stories, and they're usually, you know, a couple pages long. If they inspire me to do that, then I just keep working on my characters until I feel um, I feel like my writer's block is, I don't want to say cured because you can't really cure writer's block that fast, but if it helps you with your characters for when you start writing again, then that's always good. I always look to music definitely to keep me inspired. Going out in nature, taking a walk, a lot of different things. You just got to kind of find what works for you, and and keep working at it. Um, I don't know. I always find writer's block to be one of the suckiest things in the world because you do so much to try and break it. It's like, you know, you got a big old wall right here, like, you know, 5, 6, 10 inches cement blocks you can't bust through, can't climb over, can't walk around because it just kind of like goes forever and ever. Kind of reminds me of that Card Captors episode where they were in the maze. Segue, sorry. um, but I might just do a little vlog on writer's block because that's really a difficult one to deal with. Because it can lead to all kinds of things. You can you can be looking at, you know, 10 years from now having writer's block and all of a sudden one thing trips and all of a sudden you're like, there goes your wall. And you're like, oh, and you go straight and conquer the sunset and start writing again. So you just got to keep doing things um, to defeat your own writer's block. All right, well, that was my very last question. I hope I've given you a little insight to how I write, what I do, why I don't really sleep that much. You don't really sleep that much. One of these days I will maybe take you down my path, my writer's path, and show you my yellow brick road. But in the meantime, thank you for asking the questions you asked. I hope I answered them, and if I didn't, just comment and say, WTF, Bish, you didn't answer my question. And I'll get back on here and I will answer it the best I can. So this is where I'll leave you guys. You have a very good night. I hope you enjoy this video very much. So, annyeong. Bye bye.